Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is impromptu. For those who kind of last minute, there was a mess up in the schedule. So we're moving everybody that's supposed to do things this week, we're moving back to next week. And then I'll just rework the schedule. So somewhere we had kind of dropped the ball. So this could be a good sermon, it could be a bad sermon, and we'll all see as we go. So one thing he teaches in Spokesman's Club is you're going to hear tonight, be ready for impromptu. Of course, the Bible says always be ready to give account. So did I miss, was there an announcement for Maina Salmons yet? I got a call earlier this morning also. He was brought to the hospital. A few weeks ago, he went because of his hernia. He had slipped out of whatever that sleeve was. They hold it because they're going to do a late operation because he was on thinners and they were trying to get him stabilized. Well, looks like the blood clot in his leg disappeared now. It's gone after so many months, and they took him off thinners. But now the blood clot came out the sleeve again this morning. So they were bringing him back to the hospital. Hernia, what did I say? The hernia, I'm sorry, yeah, the hernia. And so pray for him too, and for Anna, because, you know, he's got a lot of things going on. They got a spot in his liver. They think maybe the cancer's come back. So he's just got a multitude of ailments and conditions. I'm going to pull this back a little closer here. So good news on the work. I wanted to mention to you, if you watched the News Nuggets and Insights yesterday, we put in these little graphics about summertime coming, took the spring out. So last night in my email, when I got home, I was looking at the emails. I got an email from Australia, and they said, "You said summer was coming." She said, "Just started winter down here." Oh, yeah. It's all in perspective. So you got me on that one. I never even thought about that. So I guess next week we'll have to put summer and winter into the News and Nuggets and Insights. But it's been doing really well, and I want to mention that God's Unchanging Word in 3 weeks, we'll be doing our 100th program. Yeah, so not 100 News Nuggets and Insights yet, but the God's Unchanging Word, which is the outreach, God's Unchanging Word, which is the host for News Nuggets and Insights, just one of the formats that we use today, is 100. So that's a little milestone for us. We're still going to try to do a special program for that. So we got this month, we'll be doing Father's Day coming up, and we're doing a little special on that. Then we have News Nuggets for the 100th anniversary, and then of course we're moving right into July 4th. And July 4th is what I'm working on for our quarterly. So we want to work on some really special things for our quarterly. In our nation, people don't realize the impact of July 4th and the founding. So I don't want to give it all in the sermon today, but I want to mention something to you. Is you have to wonder, why was that day so important in God's calendar? And so on that particular day was actually Tammuz 17. Tammuz 17, of course, was the day that the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem in 70 AD. It's also the day that they defiled the temple, putting swine's blood in and other things. And 3 weeks later, on the 9th of Av, the temple was gone. So it is as if that God is in the article that I'm writing for the quarterly, I'm calling it July 4th, God's jump-off point for the kingdom. In other words, when you're in battle, like with the war, one of the things you've always heard is that they would prepare staging grounds. And in these staging grounds, they would have all over Europe and in the Pacific. And in these staging grounds, they would bring all the troops, the material, the supplies, the guns, the weapons, and everything they need. And at some particular point, there'd be a time, and that's what they would call the jump-off point. And so what I'm writing about, July 4th, 1776, is one of those jump-off points for God. It's the time that God begins to launch one of the end-time the prophetic fulfillments for the return of Jesus Christ. One of them had to be the reestablishment of a modern-day Israel to promote the warning message for the end time. So anyway, I'm working on that for the quarterly, and I want to do a sermon on that, and we'll probably do some of the special around that all at the same time. Because this world has no clue of what's going on. But we need to focus and get these messages out now, because at some time they need to be on record. They need to be in the archives, so that when things begin to happen, we can say, listen, we showed you. Here, look, go back and read this. He says, now you see what we're talking about. Then God says he will bring to remembrance. Then those things will finally come to mind. He'll open their minds. He'll tweak their brains and their conscience. And they'll finally see what we've been talking about. And that's when the work of God will come, and the two witnesses will come on the scene, and that work of the innumerable multitude will begin to come into play. So now, when you see all these things coming, all right, I'm going to work into a sermon today talking about some of this, but I don't want to get into the deeper, darker, and more difficult end of it. I want to talk about a more uplifting end for what God's doing for you and I today to prepare us for that time. And it's a sermon that I was going to redo some years. I didn't know when I was eventually going to do it. I said, one of these days I'm going to have to do that sermon again. And I did it back 18 years ago. 18 years ago, and it's called The Lost Art of Fellowship. People today don't know how to fellowship. Years ago we would sit on porches. They didn't have the air conditioning. They had the big windows and the window fans, and everybody would go outside in the evening times. The kids would go out and play. You didn't have to worry about the kids coming home. And I remember my mom telling us when, she said, yeah, go out and just come on home when it gets dark. And then, in the summertime, it was 9:30, 10 o'clock sometimes you'd be coming in. So I found this, and so I'm going to talk about some of those things today. It says, things you don't hear anymore. Things you don't hear anymore. Quit slamming the screen door. You don't have the screen doors. Everybody, you got your doors shut. It's called air conditioning. I heard them talking about praying for the air conditioning. I got home last week, and in an email from services says it's really hot up here. And I'm thinking, oh, no. I'm thinking some congregation with a spiritual problem, things are getting hot. Their air conditioner broke. I said, oh, thank goodness. This is just money. I said, we could work on that. I said, I thought we'd have to come up there and deal with some kind of spiritual issue that was up there. So we had a big laugh about that. How about this one? Don't forget to wind the clock before you go to bed.
Oh, yeah, big bed.
Yeah, we don't do that no more. We don't do that. Now, for those in the past, it says, hang up your Sunday school clothes. You need to pass them down to your brother in good condition. You think about these things. I mean, that's the society we were like that, Be sure to pour the cream off the top of the milk when you open up the new bottle. I need it for baking and for Pa's coffee. You don't get that no more. They make sure they took that away from you. It's all pasteurized, homogenized. Put a dish towel over the cake so the flies won't get on it. Well, you get a fly now, people throw the food away. Afraid something's going to happen. Quit jumping on the floor. Have a cake in the oven. I think they still say that. They might still say that if they bake. Just a couple more. I got 3 pages of these things I found in my briefcase. There's $1 in my purse. Go to the service station and get me 5 gallons of gas to start the town. I remember in the late 60s, I got gas that was 26, 27 cents a gallon at Swagman's. Anybody remember Swagman's? Yeah. All right, just 2 more. Be sure to fill the lamp this morning so we don't have to do that tonight in the dark. Campsites still do that. Campsites. Says, no, I don't have 5 cents for you to go to the show. Do you think money grows on trees? 5 cents. It's funny, you think about you think about all these things. And actually, I was doing some research because another thing I want to work on is the economics of our nation. Now that we have news nuggets and insights, I don't have to deal with that all the times in the sermons. I got to tell you something. It was so hard before we started doing a weekly program for me to get up here and do a sermon and talk about the sermon like I want to talk about today. Sermons that need to be talked about and shared with the brethren, because there was so much happening in the news and elements that we need to bring into the work of the warning and talking about all the issues in the economy and things that are taking place, that it's like, man, how in the world can I just do the regular sermon that I need to do when these things seem to be taking precedent? And so now, with News Nuggets and Insights, where we get in here every week, that was actually a burden on me. I was torn. I literally was torn. I said, like, man, how do I do this? Well, now we can do it every week. And because we're doing it every week, that frees up the times to do other things that we need to talk about in sermons like today. And so I was going through all those things. I was talking about the economy. For example, and I know I'm getting into a tantrum when I get into these economy things. But how many people, they talk about how great our country's doing right now. It's funny. When President Obama got in the office, people thought I was against him because of whatever the reasons were. And now sometimes people think I'm against Donald Trump because of whatever the reasons were. And I think I haven't changed. I think I'm still right down the middle. And so when I talk about and hear how good our economy and everything's doing, I don't talk to anybody who's doing better. Maybe I'm in the wrong circles. Maybe that's the thing. I'm just not in that echelon in circles. But when I look at the statistics of what's going on, the middle class isn't getting much better. And if you did get a tax cut, it's going away because it's taken away from in your gas, in your medicines, in your doctors, and your food. And so no matter what happens, it seems like we never get out of the mess we're in, the majority of the people. When you look at the baby boomers coming out of school and going into society, the majority of them now are going back home again because they can't afford to live in the real world. So I hear all these things about how great everything's doing. And then I look at the taxes. I look at the debt. And the debt for students now, over $1.5 trillion in debt. Credit cards now have hit a new high. And I'm looking at all this stuff, I said, where is it getting better? Because it's not in the mainstream, the foundation of what made America great, where you have these things. And you talk about how you had more income to spend back in the 60s and the 70s on smaller amounts of money when people were happier. Those days are far gone. So as I began to research, I watched the divergence of how it changed in the buying power and the income and how things began to grow and grow and grow like they're doing today, but how your buying power got less and less and less. So when you look at it all, at the bottom line, I'm trying to say we need to put the warning out because people are getting careless. Why? Because, things are getting better. I can go out and make loans now. So the borrowing has increased. The rates for home rental have gotten much higher. Insurances are out of sight that people can't afford anymore. Those kind of things, when you put them in perspective, you don't want that false sense of calm that comes before a storm. Because just like with Italy, you wake up one morning, there's a country that's about to go out. That could happen in America like that. And so those kind of things we need to talk about from time to time. And now we have the program that comes in News Nuggets and Insights, and we can deal with that on a pretty regular basis. So now, with all that said, I want to talk about today being able to, it's called the lost art of fellowship. The lost art of fellowship. So I'm the kind of guy that if I had my way, I'd be a recluse. I'm an outgoing person, but when I have my choice, I'm at home. And when I'm at home, I'm focused on what I got to do next. Because on my plate, there's always something that's out there. And so I have to force myself to do this, this, and this, so I can make sure that when the time comes, we got what we need to get out. And so what that means is, no, I don't want to go do that. I need to go do this. That's not healthy in most cases. God brought us together, and He called us out of this world for a reason. So in the subject of today, I'm going to talk about something a little lighter in fellowship. So let's start in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, chapter 10. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 10. It's a scripture that we all know. So some of the scriptures I'm going to use today, we've used them before. We're going to go through them again. But I'm going to try to bring them out in light of the time and the day we live today. So Hebrews 10 is a chapter we're familiar with where God says, forsake not the assembly. So now, just like with me who would rather be a recluse from time to time, there are many people maybe even watching this program. And I'm not criticizing for anybody who doesn't go to church if you can't go. But if you can go, what I'm trying to do is encourage you to go. In other words, if you have the opportunity, and there's a brethren or group that's near you, it is better to go than to stay home. And in nearly every case, unless they're having I guess the society uses the word today, issues. Man, have they got issues. And you know, if you have issues in congregations and they have people that are backbiting and they're gossiping, yeah, I can see why you really don't want to go. But that's not the way God's people are supposed to be. But if you can go, you should go. All right. So now let's pick up the story in Matthew 10, verse 24. All right. What did I say, Matthew? Don't listen to me. Follow the Bible. You know, I'm in Hebrews. I don't know why I said Matthew. I have no idea why I said Matthew. I'll find a good reason and I'll tell you later. Because my brain just went brain dead. All right, Hebrews 10. I'm going to actually start in verse 23 instead of... no, let's go all the way back to verse 22. It says, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. So when you come before God, in other words, he's telling you the condition, your mind, your state, your body you should be in. When you come before God. So when he says now, when we draw near, where's he drawing near? Drawing near to God, but he's also telling you and preparing the way for you to draw near to the brethren, those that are called out in this world. So watch, it carries through in the thought process. Verse 23 says, let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that has promised. And from time to time, you get under guns and you feel the pressure and you say, man, I just don't know if this is for me. I don't think I can make it anymore. You know, that's where Satan wants to have you. He wants you to keep you on that line so that if he can bring in the trial, you'll say, well, you see that? God doesn't want me there. God doesn't want me to do all these things. And they will draw away. And I've actually had people tell me that. So no, God doesn't want me there. And they will move back to a Sunday-keeping church, which is absolutely bizarre, but that's what they will do. And then verse 24 is where I wanted to pick the story up. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. Now that's a task. All right, so the very first thing he's telling us that when you come near, when you draw near to him and to other people, he says, let us draw near with a pure heart and a clear conscience. Let us consider one another. In other words, you're not thinking about yourself anymore. You're going there to think about with others now. All right, so now let's take this. There's one verse. And these things you love to do in Bible study and discussion, and you're probably doing it on those Saturday mornings. When I come in, I hear a lot of laughing, and it sometimes it gets really loud in there, and I'm saying, man, they're having a great time in there today. Clayton's laughing over here. And so when you come near one another, so you start provoking unto love and good works, that means that when you get there, you're helping someone else. Your mind is not on yourself. How about, or have you heard, well, you know, I don't go anymore because I don't get nothing out of it. Have you ever heard that? I'm not getting anything out of it. Well, then immediately what you want to ask, well, what are you putting into it? What have you brought to the table? It's like having the potluck like you're going to have today. You know, so what did you bring today? What did you put into the potluck? What did you bring to the table? So are you provoking us unto good works? So when you see someone, you know, quite often people are having some pretty serious issues at home. You know, loss of loved ones. Miss Jackson and their family who's not here today, I was praying, looking for them. I was hopefully, you know, that their family's okay because they lost a loved one who drowned down in the islands a week ago. And I'm thinking, and I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I wonder if they're having at the funeral today maybe, and the family getting together. You know, they're all coming into town. Yesterday afternoon, I get the phone call. I knew something happened. I didn't know what it was because I got emails coming into my computer asking for addresses for the Council family for the loss. I said, whoa. And I was on the phone with Steve Council, literally on the phone with Steve Council, when he got a text of an emergency that he thought it was his son. They had to bring to the hospital. He thought there was a heart condition, and his son was getting married next week. Not knowing what was going on, so we immediately said goodbye. So before he got back to me, found out that his grandson had got hit by a car, 7 years old, and was killed. And so that family today is in absolute pain and suffering. And his son, Steve, was going to marry next week. And so you get all these things coming. You know, the Travis and the condition he's under. You know, people in the finances and health. But I can go around this room, the prayers from May. Everybody in the room, we face things in our lives every single day. So when we come together, God wants us to take that time and says, listen, you got an opportunity now. Let's focus on the other for a moment and see what we can do. And you know, if you do that, God will bless you and he will help you through your pain and your suffering. There's no way to explain it except that you can't outgive God. So if you're giving up your time and your heart and your inspiration to help another person, then God will give you the comfort you need. And so like I'm on the phone with Steve last night at about 9:30, I guess, when I called him back. And I said, Steve, I said, there's nothing I can sit on the phone and tell you that you don't already know. I said, but I need to tell you anyway. And then I let him know that I'm here for you. You know, I won't be bothering you, but I will be calling you. I said, but your job now, as painful as this is going to be, it said you're going to have to be the pillar for your family, and you're going to have to be that shadow of strength so that they can see what's going on. And now they're going to have to see the faith of what we've been preaching all this time, and that world of hope as they watch for that little face that's in that coffin that they'll do the funeral with. How you're going to have to be the one to support them. And when you have the quiet moments, then you go off and cry. I said, and God will give you the strength and you will get through it. And I said, when you can't, I said, call me. You know, with God's help, we'll go through it together. And that's what we do with one another in God's church. And this morning when I get a phone call as early, it's like 6:30 in the morning, and Anna says, look, I got to rush Manus to the hospital again. But those things are going to go on more and more and more as we go through this time and we get through to the end time. Because you see, the pain and suffering of this world is going to increase. So while we're going to that, what God's doing right now, he's giving you and I the opportunity to strengthen our minds and our hearts and our souls so that we can focus on what's really, really important. And if we can do that, he will get us through those difficult moments and those difficult times. Now, going on from verse 24, let me read that verse again and we'll move on. So let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some. So even back then, they were having the problem with people who would say, I really don't want to go. So God says, don't forsake the assembly. In other words, God brought you into his body, into the ecclesia, which is the body of Jesus Christ, for a reason. And we don't always know what those reasons are. But at some point in time, you will find out as you go through and get into his word and into the services. Just spend time getting to know each other. One of the things I like to do when I'm around with, especially with new churches when I travel, I like to ask them questions. Tell me about yourself. How did you learn about the church? You know, how's your family? Give me some background. And then you get to know the person a little bit better. All right, so now verse 25. Let me pick up where I left off. Not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another. All right, so in other words, encourage one another to come to church, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, that is not referring to just a weekly Sabbath. It's referring to the return of Jesus Christ. It says it's talking about the day approaching, talking about the day of the Lord, that terrible time that's coming. It says when you see those things coming, you need to ever so much more be more diligent than you ever were, not to forsake the assembly. Now, what happens when you spend more time together? You get on each other's nerves. You ever notice a family? During hurricanes, everybody get 15, 20 people huddling in one room and the air conditioner's out, they got no power, and you got 3 or 4 days together, and then it gets a little ripe. People are a little tired, it's hot, it's irritable, and they get on each other's nerves. Well, sometimes that happens in church, and people get on each other's nerves. When you see that happen, go to your brother and say, you got on my nerves. Be honest with them. Tell them, you know, hey, man, that we used to have a lady that was here, and she's passed away now. I remember Jeannie and Curly Langley. She had a sweatshirt she used to wear. She says, I have one nerve left, and you're getting on it. And she would wear that at the feast all the time, you know, because that's when you're out of your element, then those things happen. So if someone's bothering you, take and go aside in the way of love and mercy. So look, you know, I don't mean to hurt you. I said, but man, what you're doing really offended me. And sometimes it's simply a misunderstanding. But if you can do that out of love with one another, in a spirit of love and compassion, you can hug each other, and it's over with. And you know, you've won that brother over. But you know what people do today? They get offended, they leave. Mm-hmm. And they don't tell nobody. They go on the phone, they call somebody in another group or another church and say, you know that person? And so it escalates. So now, verse 26. Now this is the kicker. And people don't normally go to verse 26. If we sin willfully, after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remains no more sacrifice for sins. The word for is a preposition continuing from the previous verse. So what is it telling us for? It's telling you if you're forsaking the assembly. Means, and this is coming from God's word, if you forsake the assembly, you're willfully sinning. In other words, God's brought people together to be able to worship and to fellowship together. All right, so now, let's go to Malachi chapter 3. Malachi chapter 3. You know, I sat home this morning. I'll tell you the truth. I was tired. I was been a long week, busy things, a lot of emotion. You know, I spent a lot of hours on the phone this week dealing with emotional issues with people around the country. And I was off duty today. You know, I said, well, I don't have any responsibility. I don't even have announcements. And I'm saying, I might be able to sneak out of there today and stay home and rest. You heard that here just now. So, and then I said, well, that's not right. I mean, I can go there and just fellowship and have a good time because I don't have to do anything today. You know, and so then I got there, and as soon as I walk in the door, Tom! I said, what in the world? That was Edgar. Yeah, Edgar said. And so anyway, they said that we had a miscue on the schedule, and the person, I won't say who it was because I don't want to embarrass Bobby Weber. He said, I didn't get the schedule somehow. I said, well, that's all right, we'll go do something. So I ran to my notes, grabbed some more notes, and I come out. You know what? I'm really glad I came. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I could have put a DVD on. I mean, it would have worked just as well. I said, but you know what? I'm here, and I said, let's trust God and let's go do this. And we'll go from there, see where it goes. And so then I started looking through all these things and said, well, here's one I've been wanting to do for a long time. I said, let's just go do that because it's actually an area we've been discussing. We discussed it in the car coming home from Syracuse. It's areas I've been working with at home and it's the issue is, how do we inspire one another is basically what it boils down to. How do you make your congregation and your Sabbaths more enlightening, more exciting, more happy for people to be there? You know, how do we bring in a new person into the church and the fold and get them to be a part of the family? So now let's go to Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6. All right, Malachi 3 and verse 6. God says, for I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob are not consumed. In other words, God's there. He says, look, I'm not going to change. I'm giving you something to do. He says, I'm not going to change so that if you make a mistake or you have problems, and God says, look, you're not going to get consumed, but you're going to have to change. You're going to have to work on that. So now I want to pick up now verse 16. Where God says he's not going to change, he's going to continue to give mercy on us if we're doing what we're supposed to. Verse 16, then they that feared the Lord spoke often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord and that thought upon his name. So whenever you feel like you don't want a fellowship, you know, there's times you need to be alone. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. You need to be alone with God. In prayer, meditation, and get your head all straightened out with him. But there's times that you got to be with the brethren too. It says in verse 16, they feared the Lord, spoke often one to another. That's really important. So yesterday when I got those emails looking for Steve Counsel's address, you know what the brethren were doing? They were trying to issue comfort before I even knew what happened. That's God's Spirit at work in the brethren. You know, and I'm sure God was pleased with that. All right, so his book of remembrance was written before them that feared the Lord and thought upon his name. And God says, and they shall be mine, says the Lord of hosts. And in that day, when I make up my jewels, I will spare them as a man spares his own son that serves him. So we need to think about how God is focused on us. Back in the Hebrews where he says, listen, consider the other person. In other words, he's showing us right here how we should be considering that other person. That they're part of the family that need to be encouraged and need to be helped as they go through things. And then verse 18, he says, then they shall return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serves God and him that serves not. So he's actually going to take discernment. Believe it or not, at the end time when things are so topsy-turvy, and it's getting that way now, and we deal with that every week in News Nuggets and Insights, it's getting so turned around, upside down, that the younger people who are coming out of schools, who now have the teachers who are teaching them the wrong way, that's the right way. And so they have no balance, they have no stability, they have no rudder anymore. And they're beginning to weaver to the left and to the right, and they understand what's going on, and they have the emotional issues. There's more emotional issues today than they've had ever in our society. More suicide in young people than they ever had. They got it better than they ever did. They can't find homes. They can't find direction. They can't find understanding what even true love is. And the more we try to bring it out, the more the world hates it and tries to silence it. And so you're beginning to see all those things. So at the end time, they don't know the difference between right and wrong. And so God says it's going to take discernment to be able to do that. So now, let's go now to, let's see where I want to get to, because some of these scriptures really won't apply that I had here. So I want to go to 1 Peter 5, because this sermon that I was looking at took a whole different direction than what I want to use today. 1 Peter 5. So if I was in a Bible study today, I would stop right now and say, I would begin to ask you, because I want to provoke your thoughts. And we can't do it here in a sermon, but if you ever did it in a Bible study, and I was there today and I was going through the process, I would ask you, why am I going to 1 Peter 5? In the light of the subject that we're going through. And everything that I said that led up for the last almost 30 minutes now, that led up to this, why would I go to 1 Peter? All right, so if we look at the historical content of 1 Peter, you'll see that during that time, Peter's addressing the brethren who are going through persecution and trials. So when you go through 1 Peter and you're going through trials and persecution like you're beginning to see today, Peter would be the book that you would go to. Why? Because they went through what God's people were beginning to go through today. And that book deals with the issues of persecution and the difficulties of life, and it is the book of encouragement during tough times. So that's why if you were in a ministry and you would go through, what would you go through? Well, you go through, let God lead you into the books that would encourage the people for the time of today. And that's what you would be dealing with now. For example, let's suppose the United States collapsed in its finances. Would you simply just get in there and talk about Proverbs in a Bible study? Probably not. You're going to probably have a lot of issues with people that they're going through in their lives. So you're going to be dealing with scriptures that's immediate, meet in due season. Now that just doesn't mean holy days. That means the issues that affect people's lives today. That's why I would go to 1 Peter 5. So that you would look at that and say, okay, what does God have for us in this day and time? 1 Peter 5 now, and I'm going to begin in verse 1. It says, the elders who are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness for the sufferings of Christ. So what he did there is what I'm doing today, is he went back in and said, listen, what you're going through, Jesus Christ went through it too. In other words, he gets you to understand that what you're feeling, what you're going through in your emotion, to realize that you're not an isolated case, that others are going through this, so you can encourage and exhort one another. Witness for the sufferings of Christ, and also partakers of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you. Take oversight of it, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Neither being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. So as you come together, this is This, I know it's said to the elders, but you see, when you're in the church, everyone comes, you have a responsibility when you come in the same spirit is being laid out right here. To exhort one another. Not to be a lord over another, but out of love and compassion one for another. It says, and when the chief shepherd shall appear, you shall receive the crown of glory that fades not. In like manner, the younger submit yourselves to the older. So now we bring in the respect that, well, maybe somebody who's been around a lot longer than I knows a lot more. And then so you begin to draw from one another, the older and the younger and the older. Yea, all of you, be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. So Peter was trying to say, listen, the trials you're going through, when you go read through Peter, they were having a tough time. He said, listen, this is just going to be for a while. But God's going to restore you, and so he begins to encourage one another, and that's what we do. So like when the phone calls, when people would call me up and look for comfort, you know who I learned from? My mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was a great ear for people who was going through suffering. And she was, all the time, and she would sit there and she would say, I know, darling, I know. And you know what? She never really threw a lot of advice out. But when the people left, they felt comforted. She had a lot of sayings. Of course, Audrey's writing them up in the quarterly now, my mom used to say. But she never used it at the time when people needed comfort. I remember her calling me up from time to time with some of the times when I was going through some real emotional issues. And she would encourage me. And that was a real gift. And the other gift that she had, she prayed a lot. And remember when she died, one of the things that Daniela said at the funeral, he said, the one thing we're going to miss most is her prayers. It's because she was there and praying for you. All right, so going on. That's where we're at here. Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. All right, so now he says all these things. He says, look, we know you're going through it, but you need to be humble and you need to submit. You're going to get over it, and God's going to restore you. And then he tells them, this is what you need to do. Verse 8. Be sober. Be vigilant. Because your adversary, the devil, like a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. So then he gets on to encouragement. He says, now, if you want to get over this, you want to get through this, this is what you need to do. So I'm telling you today that if we want to get through what's coming, we need to take the time right now to be dedicated, to be sober, to be diligent, to be vigilant in our callings, so that when we are getting together, so that God can give us the reward and get us through what's coming. And if you can do that, he'll get you through the difficult times. So now let's go take a look at one of the ways that they did that. I'm going to go to Psalm 133 first. Let me go to Psalm 133 first, because it picks up pretty much where that was at. In the book of Psalms, verse 133. It's a real short book. Chapter. 133. I think it's only 3 verses. Yeah. Psalm 133. Behold, how good and pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity. It's like that when you come in with the brethren. When we were up in Syracuse, you could just feel the spirit, that excitement. When you come in for fellowship and for worship, like when I come in, when y'all in the middle of Bible study quite often, you can feel the spirit of the joy, the people coming together. You can feel it during potluck. It's real quiet during potluck, though, till the food's gone. Then it gets really noisy. You ever notice that? Everybody's all wound up, and then right in the middle of potluck is real quiet. Everybody's eating. Then it gets real loud again. Now you probably pay attention to that today. Verse 2. It is like a precious ointment on the head that ran down on the beard, even Aaron's beard that went down to the skirts in his garments, like the dew of Hermon, and like the dew of descendant upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life evermore. So there it is, the brethren dwelling together. We just read in Malachi, and we see the command in Hebrews. We saw the pain through Peter. So now let's take all these things together and put them to an example of when the brethren were dwelling together. in a time that wasn't so pleasant. Let's go to the book of Acts chapter 12. Let's go to the book of Acts chapter 12. So I'm going to begin reading through, and I'll skip through it, but I'm going to go through the chapter now of Acts chapter 12. Remember, we said how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together, right? Acts chapter 12. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. He goes out and he kills James. Literally just wipes him off the face, of breath gone. And he saw the people cheering, raising their head, applauding. More! Kill more! So he went and grabbed Peter, the next one that he could find. All right, so now that's the stage that we're into. How good it is for brethren to dwell together, right? So now, you know the story, but let's go through it. So there, in verse 3, And because it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter. Then were the days of unleavened bread. So by the way, this is long after Christ was crucified, buried, and ascended to heaven. They're still keeping the holy days. I just wanted to throw that out in case anybody's new or you hear this sermon. The holy days were never done away. They were still keeping them long after Christ had descended. All right, so now they're keeping during the days of unleavened bread. So when they had apprehended him, put him in prison, he delivered him to the quaternions of the soldiers to keep him, intending after, and that should be Passover. That's not, you got Easter. If you got an original King James, it says Easter, but that's called Pascha, which is translated Passover. This is the only place in the entire Bible that the people took that word in. But if you outside of the King James Version, you will see it is correctly translated Passover in every other translation. So after Passover, to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing by the church unto God for him. You know they wasn't getting together for a potluck and having a great time. They were huddled behind closed doors together, partly for fear of their lives. So when they heard that Peter had been taken, they knew what just happened to John. They were there, what did they do? As brethren. How good and pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together. Why? Because in this case, God hears the prayers and pulls Peter out of prison. So now we need to think about that when things get real bad. Sometimes, you know, I don't know what down the road, but you may get a phone call and maybe you won't be able to go. And I'm telling people all around the country, you may need to huddle together to pray for another brethren who's been picked up and put in prison for preaching the word of God. Now, don't believe it can't happen. It will happen in the future, and God warns it is going to take place. Over in England, just last week or the week before, we'll be talking about it next week, News Nuggets and Insights, there was a person who they call him a radical conservative because he was preaching against Islam. They told him he had to stop. When he wouldn't stop, they put him in prison, had him arrested, went to court, and in jail by the next day. And they tried to sneak it under the rug that nobody would know about it. Finally, the news heard about it, and then there was just hundreds of people protesting. So the freedom of speech was just gone, just absolutely washed away. And you're beginning to see that happen in America today. So from time to time, you may get a phone call. So listen, we're meeting at the church. We need to get together and pray. And so don't be surprised that that day won't come. That will happen. So all right, going on. So Peter said, therefore was kept in prison, but much prayer was made without ceasing by the church of God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door in the prison. So now try to picture this. There's Peter. He's in prison. It's at night. Guards on two sides of him. He's locked up in chains. He can't go anywhere. He can't go anywhere. And behold, an angel of the Lord came upon him, and the light shone in prison, and he smote Peter on the one side and raised him up, saying, "Arise quickly." And the chains literally just falls off him. from his hands. And the angel said to him, gird yourself and bind on your sandals. And so he did. And he said to him, cast your garment out and follow me. So he went out and he followed him, and he knew not that it was true, because he didn't even know it was really happening. He's beginning to think this might just be a vision or a dream. All right, so that he was going through. All right, so he followed him and he went out when it was true, which was done by the angel, but thought it was a vision. And when they were past the first and the second guard, they came unto the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. And they went out and they passed through the one street, and then immediately the angel departed from him. So there he was. I mean, just like in a movie. I mean, this is a script written by Hollywood. Chains fall off. You see them walking out. The guards are sound asleep. They don't even hear the chains. I mean, that's pretty loud chains that they bound them with. The chains fall on the ground. They're sound asleep. They have no idea. Gate opens up on its own. He turns around. He's there all by himself. I said, what an amazing story. And you have to wonder, did God go through this miraculous intervention because the brethren were together? I think so. He wouldn't have wrote it this way in the Bible had not that been so. So what are we looking at when brethren come together? God says, look in Hebrews. Now I'm putting it today now. I'm putting in everyday terms today what we're talking about, not the what if or down the road. In Hebrews says, forsake not the assembly, especially if you see things getting very close. When you see that day of the Lord, you better get together. Why? Because things are going to happen. And so God's going to take those that he's marked and he's called out and he's listened to, those brethren who speak often one to another. And he's got that name, a book of remembrance written in there. And so things go down, and you're going to find some brother been thrown in prison for some reason. And so the prayers are going to go up, and he's going to hear those prayers, and he's going to look at his book. He say, oh, I know that one. I know Martha. I know John. Listen, they've been getting together for a long time. Father, Jesus Christ sitting on his right hand side. We need to intervene on this behalf right now. We don't have time to wait. And miracles are going to take place just like then. So you see all these things, these examples, they're not left just for stories to make us feel good. God says all these things were left for you and I. He said these were written for us so that we will not make the same mistakes. So now we go back into the story that we're reading. So now there he is, he's all by himself. When Peter came to himself, he says, now I know of a surety that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary and mother and John, and whose surname was Mark, where there were many gathered together praying. Of course, we just read that a little bit earlier. So as Peter knocked on the door and the gate, the maid came and hearkened, named Rhoda. And when she heard Peter's voice, she opened not the gate, for she was glad, but she ran in and said that Peter stood at the gate. That's funny. You got to picture that. There's Peter outside the gate, let me in, and says, oh, it's Peter. She just runs in and leaves him out there. He just escaped from prison. You think you want to hide him. She just leaves him at the door. And they said to her, are you mad? But she constantly affirmed that it was so. And they said to him, but it's an angel. Now, that's the other funny side of the story. They're out there praying for Peter's release. God releases him, and they don't believe that he's released. I love it. That's the way the story got. There's humor when you go through some of these things. And God says, therefore you are not consumed, remember? So in God's mind, he could take the approach, you doubters, then you didn't even believe your prayer and got mad at them, but he didn't. God had mercy on them because of their lack of understanding. And that's the same thing he has with us. So when you see a brother who comes together and they don't always do what's right, and the Sabbath always isn't the way that it should be for them, and they're overtaken in a fault, we should do the same thing. We need to restore that brethren. We need to encourage them. So look, you need to stop it. And you need to be back at church, and you need to be living honorable before God and help them through. But if a brother doesn't want to turn, you have no choice but to turn them loose. But if you can, you should help restore that individual. So now let's pick up the story now in verse... I want to pick it up. Well, I was going to read to 28, but shoot, I'm going to run out of time before I even get to the point I wanted to make. So in Herod, and let's pick up in verse 20. So Herod was greatly displeased with them in Tyre and Sodom, but they said to one another, it says, having made blasphemous that the king's chamberlain and friend desired peace because of their, that's, now let me pass that up because that's going to take too long to develop that. So let me just go ahead and finish up where I was, verse 17. But beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of prison. He said, go and show these things to James and to the brethren. And he departed, and he went to another place. Now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers concerning what was come before Peter. But when Herod had sought for him, they found him not. He examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. When he went down from Judea, from Caesarea, there abode. So you know the rest of the story. So let me go back to where I wanted to be here then, because of time's sake. You and I, or in all probability, most of us here today are going to be alive before the return of Christ. The examples of the New Testament is going to be very similar to the time before the return of Jesus Christ. You and I are watching the change of the landscape that we live in today. You can't even go out and talk about God. You can't talk about righteous things anymore without someone trying to bring condemnation and putting you down. You're going to see the continual escalation of violence against that type of thought. Because we're living in a time where Satan knows it's drawing short. And because it's drawing short, he's going to do everything in his power to destroy the opposition. No longer can the opposition be tolerated, which is us. It has to be destroyed. So when we think about all those things, we need to think beyond, I'm just going to church. In the back of our minds, we need to realize that we're a part of a plan of God that's going to bring about the return of Jesus Christ. Your calling is called first fruits. You have been called to be a part of the advanced team, the warning, the messenger, the preparing for the return of Jesus Christ. And it is through your calling that many others are going to be helped and given hope through what you go through. And some people are going to go through a lot of suffering to give hope to other people. Those will be the strongest of God's people. God doesn't choose the weakest to do these things. You know, the church used to teach that. The weak are going to be left behind. They're going to be the martyrs. Well, you know, that's never been the way it was in the Bible. God only used the strongest that he knew would not turn. Those who have been tried and tested, that he would use the example to give hope to the rest of the people. You, God's people, everybody who hears this DVD, you are part of the first fruits that's called in this life. Yes, it's great to get together and have a great time and fellowship and have the warmth and have little fellowship parties and get together and play games from time to time. But we always need to keep in the back of our minds why we're called. We're called to become the first fruits, to be able to be that example ushering in the return of Jesus Christ. And most of us are going to be there at the end time. So while we get closer and closer to that time and you watch the church seem to want to get smaller and smaller, don't give up, because God has a greater plan. And in that plan, the reason we're getting together is the return of Jesus Christ. So during that time now, until that day, what do? We get together. We strengthen one another. We forsake not the assembly, and we look ever so close to the return of Jesus Christ.